Hello, it's November the 15th, 2001, and it's my distinct pleasure to, on behalf of the Health Physics Society History Committee, to be interviewing a extremely well-known and a person that has contributed a vast amount to the profession of health physics, and that's Tom Gerusky. Tom is a person I've known for many years. I've read many of the things that he's done, and I've been lucky enough to be associated with a few of them. But Tom, could you start off by telling us about your early years and how you got into health physics?
Sure. I was an undergraduate student at Union College in Schenectady, New York, waiting for word from medical school that I was accepted, when the head of the biology department called me into his office, and by the way, Tom Murphy, who is with the NRC now as a administrative law judge, called both of us in. We were fraternity brothers, classmates at Union, and said that he had just gotten a call from the University of Rochester saying that there were some openings for in the graduate program under an AEC fellowship in radiological physics, and were we interested? And this was like in January of my senior year, of our senior year. And we said, sure, we're interested, because at that time we hadn't heard back from medical school and we weren't sure what we were going to do. And so we filled out some application forms, and a month later we got notification that we'd both been accepted. And we said bye-bye to medical school at that point because it was free. What's interesting is the devil, the concept of radiation protection. It was 1956, and a lot of things were happening. And so I went off to Rochester in search of the graduate program.
Was Noble Standard there at that point?
Yeah, he was. He was one of the, he and Hoyt Whipple Wilhelm, baseball pitcher, but Hoyt Whipple and I can't remember the rest of them. We had a pretty big class. I think it was the largest class, graduate school class, ever at Rochester. And
how large was it, Bob?
I don't know, 25. It was in the 20s. It was really large. Charlie Meinhold was another member of our class, and afterwards, Tom, Charlie, and I. Both as part of the summer program was at Brookhaven, and we went there, got offered, the three of us got offered jobs working at Brookhaven, and got into the real world of health physics at Brookhaven.
Operational.
Yeah, right.
And what did you start in, by the way? Were you in the reactor right away?
Yeah, I was not the chief health physicist at the reactor, but I was one of the health physicists at the graphite reactor. And from there, I went to the hot lab, which was right next door to the reactor building. And then to the Cosmotron, with the particle physics people, who were so far over my head. I mean, I didn't know what they were talking about most of the time. I don't know if they knew, but I mean, they didn't know how to get in and out of the parking lot, but boy, could they solve physics problems and math. I mean, anyway, a couple of years there, and I decided that that health physics at a particle accelerator wasn't for me, and I thought that the real world was a lot, outside of Brookhaven, where it was a great place to work, but I didn't know that at the time, and so I went and I left, and I went to work at Squibb Institute for Medical Physics in New Brunswick, New Jersey, where they were making medical isotopes.
Especially iodines?
Iodines, yeah, P32, under the trade name Metatope. I don't know if you recall.
Remember that.
But when actually the person, there was a guy at the hot lab at Brookhaven who recommended me for that position, so when I went there, I assumed, and he was a consultant, I assumed that their health and safety program was in pretty good shape, until I got there and I found a mess, and slowly cleaned it up. But people were handling P32 with you know, military quantities of P-32 with their gloves. There was
no shielding.
No shielding. No filtration on their iodine releases at all. All of their, they would work in a hood and the stuff would go right out the stack. They were doing iodine monitoring of thyroids of the workers there with a crystal, but they had misinterpreted what the standard was, and most of the technicians had received significant thyroid doses in excess of what the allowable standard was. So I had to call in the Atomic Energy Commission inspectors. That didn't sit too well with the brass at the company, but it made a big difference at the plant. And by the time I left a couple of years later to go work in Pennsylvania in their radiation protection program, they had a pretty good handle on what was going on.
Did you ever see any nodules? Any clinical?
No. I mean, I was only there a couple of years, and when I left, I told each of the technicians that if they ever ran into trouble and needed someone to testify in court for them, that I'd be available, because they really got some good exposures. But no, we never saw anything.
Do any molybdenum cal work?
I was working on actually I was working on an yttrium generator, getting strontium-90 from Brookhaven and making yttrium. And I mean, that was a sidelight. I mean, I was supposed to be the aerophysicist, but they needed someone to do some chemistry, and that I didn't enjoy at all. I didn't really enjoy the chemistry of the radiochemistry issue.
Of course, you have an awful lot more beta from the yttrium than you do from the P-32, for heaven's sake.
Oh, I know. And but I don't think it ever got. I left before the project was over. And one of the problems I found there was actually trying to measure iodine in air. There were no commercial samplers available to collect iodine. So I fooled around a little bit with some activated charcoal filters and made some, and bought some was it silver?
Zeolite.
Silver
zeolite.
And tried them, and so I was able to rig up a sampler that I thought did a pretty good job of detecting airborne concentrations. My biggest concern was what was being besides what was inside, and I knew that you could take care of that, but the problem was what was leaving the
Did you do some calculations for the maximum individual off-site? For your iodines?
Yeah, I played with it and decided it was time to leave.
Okay.
And that they needed to put, I had no idea what the past, it was like Hanford. Who knows? But they had designed a brand new laboratory with some fancy hoods and some charcoal filters and the whole bit. So that was going to be solved, and and they had a good man to replace me, so I wasn't concerned when I left. But I really wanted to get away from I was too concerned about the people. I really was. I wanted to get into an area where I would be concerned about a lot of people and not an individual, and their health and safety. I was more concerned about. I was too concerned, too involved with them personally to really step back and do a good job. So when I saw people getting serious exposures, it really bothered me for one-on-one with the people. Luckily that changed, but I said it would be much nicer to worry about the 12 million people in Pennsylvania than one. So that's one of the reasons I left. I also left because I thought I was getting a raise, but back then, when I first joined Brookhaven National Lab, my starting salary was $5,700 a year in 1957. Fred Cowan, who was the director, was making $12,000 a year. And he had a boat, he had a nice house, and he had a boat on the bay. And I said, oh man, if I can only make $12,000, I was 21 years old, I can make $12,000 a year, I can have all these things. Well, I made $12,000 a year in about 5 years, And I didn't have any of that stuff. So, I mean, I started to realize, hey, I think he might have had some money other than his money as director of the program in Brookhaven. But, so anyway, I did move. Every time I moved, I got a nice raise, but when I found the job in Pennsylvania, it was something I really enjoyed and I loved, and
How did you find it, by the way?
I was at a Health Physics Society meeting, and there was a card posted in the employment area.
And when was that?
1961, in the summer of '61, and I joined, and I applied and joined the Pennsylvania Department of Health as the head of their radiation protection program in September 1961.
And who were you working for at that time?
An MD by the name of Jan Lieben, who was in charge of the occupational health program in the Department of Health. They had a radiological health section, they had an industrial hygiene section, they had an industrial medicine section, and a nursing section. They even had industrial dentistry, which they weren't using anymore, so the dentist was an old-timer, and he was assigned to the radiological health section to worry about dental x-ray. And his job was getting the dentist to comply with the regulations.
So when you came in, there was a very active program in place.
Well, there were 6 or 7 people in the program. The Pennsylvania had a program started. They were concerned about occupational radiation exposure in the 30s, and as a matter of fact, they purchased a Geiger counter from a Canadian company, and I'm not sure exactly how, but I did see a reference to it with an old paper that was written, and and they were worried about radium dial painters. So they would take the Geiger counter and place it over the chest and the abdomen, the tube over the chest and the abdomen of these radium dial painters to determine if they had any uptake. So that was probably the first whole body counting that was ever done.
In the States, yeah, that's fascinating.
Yeah, but
I didn't realize
anyway,
it was done, and that was done in the 30s?
In the 30s, yeah. But nothing, and then...
anything come of it? Any positive numbers?
No, and there was no, well, there was data, but it, it didn't mean very much. I mean, there were counts. That's all that I saw in the report. But in any case, the occupational health aspects of radiation protection, worker protection, was the most important issue. And they before I came with the department, they had some regulations that were really based on occupational exposure only. They did, though, in the late 50s, ban the use of shoe-fitting fluoroscopes in Pennsylvania. I think it was on the basis of the exposure of instead of the exposure of the people, it was more the exposure of the operator who had to be around those things and use them all the time. When in late '61, they had just proposed some new regulations that expanded the role from just occupational to general public, and they had accepted, I guess it was the Council of State Governments, or no, it was the National Bureau of Standards, I guess, proposed or draft, suggested regulations, and they went into effect, and they were registration of dental and of medical X-ray.
This were the old MBS handbook.
Yeah, it was an MBS handbook. So that it was the primary emphasis was medical, but there were some other things going on in Pennsylvania related to isotopes, and my boss, the MD, got involved with a study of, well, he was the Harvard Medical School radium, it was MIT radium study.
Which is Robley Evans' study.
Robley Evans study. He got involved with that. he was an MD, so he would go around the country digging up people who died, who had worked in the radium business and had significant body burdens. And then they would ship the body off to MIT, they would do something to it and come back. So he got interested in radium.
Rowley had a whole body counter there. You know,
yeah,
he designed the first whole body counter for this.
But it was, these were dead people, so I wasn't exactly sure how he was doing. I mean,
well, they wanted to get bones if they could,
Yeah.
so they could grind them up and do the trabecular surface of the bones.
So the director of the division would be running all over the country on weekends in particular, digging up people and sending them off to Boston. And that got him interested in radium in Pennsylvania, and so he directed us to start looking at all the historical records relating to radium. And so we found a lot of interesting
How early
places.
did you get into the Lansdowne situation? When was that? Do you remember when that happened, Tom?
No, it was in '63 maybe.
Because that's the first time I
62,
remember
63.
seeing you give a talk at the Health Physics Society. Is when
Yeah,
you and John
Belfort
gave a wonderful Mott and Jeff talk, which was really a good talk about the problems of the Lansdowne situation.
Yeah, we tried to do it Fed state conflict thing just to make it light because it was a serious problem. But
you did a very good job though, because A, it was entertaining, but B, it was extremely informative.
yeah, there was a lot of information that we had. Yeah, that probably what happened in Lansdowne is that a professor, I guess, from the University of Pennsylvania medical school,
we call it,
was making radium sources on the side as standards for the National Bureau of Standards, and he was doing it in his basement.
Well, he was digesting these and
was,
reconstituting them
right.
and selling them.
Oh yeah, he was selling them too.
He was making big money selling them.
Right.
That's how he made his money.
But and we found through records. I mean, I don't remember what the trail was, but it may even have been through Canadian Radium that we located that place.
The old El Dorado mine company. Yeah.
And the same thing in Cannonsburg also was supplying radium to the people in Lansdowne, and maybe it was, I don't remember the paper trail how we found it, but we sent one of our young health physicists down, and he walked by the place with a survey meter and the thing went off scale and called us. And that was the beginning of.
Remember that was on the sidewalk, wasn't
yeah,
it?
that was on.
He
didn't even get anywhere near the house. He just walked by the house.
The sidewalk,
yeah.
And I still remember that they pegged the meter.
Yeah.
I
don't remember.
You
I think he
about
probably had a scintillator, but I don't know. I mean, it's just so long ago now. But when we did get into the house, and it was a split. What do you call them? Attached two houses side by side.
Duplex.
And went down into the basement and found that it was really badly contaminated with radium and radon daughters. We backed away, got the people who were living that side of the house out and tried to figure out what to do. And there was no Superfund. I mean, there were no, the people who were living in the house didn't have any money. I mean, they were really...
Well, this is before EPA was even existed.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, this was 1962, 61,
well, EPA
63.
was 74.
Right. And so, I mean, there were no... We were trying to figure, maybe we could get the highway department to build a road through the property or something, I mean, to try to get it cleaned up. And we went... We didn't know what to do, and finally, with a lot of effort and convincing, we got the Federal Bureau of Radiological Health to conduct a quote research study there. And John Vilforth had just joined the Bureau after his stint in the Air Force, and was eager to get involved in the radium issue. He was doing radium issues at the national level. So combined, they provided the money and some of the staff and a laboratory a field laboratory that they brought in from the Air Force Base in Ohio, so that we could make measurements there. And we provided additional staff, our own staff. I mean, I put a supplied air respirator on and went down into the basement with a jackhammer and personally chipped away at the radium and put it in barrels and got it out of there. It was a big project. It was a summer-long project.
And this physicist's private home.
Yes, this was his private home in Lansdowne, and he and his wife and a technician worked on, at least one technician, worked on making these radium sources in the basement. We had some photographs, and I don't know where they are now, of the wife on an open oven with a crucible, and she's stirring it as you know. It was it was really unbelievable.
Now, was she ever body counted?
Yeah, and I don't think. I'm not sure. I think so. I think both of them were.
Because the data I got was that he was whole body counted, but they couldn't find any data on her.
I don't remember.
And kind of Murphy's Law, I thought. But anyway.
Yeah, and I guess the technician died of a radiation-related disease, but the professor died at what, 95 or something? I mean, it might have been radiation-related. He might have lived to 96. I mean, I don't know, but it was interesting, and we just, our whole our whole office, 5 or 6 people then, just stopped everything, and we all went down and worked on the project to get it cleaned up. Shipped the material off, I guess, to Kentucky, I'm not sure.
And I remember at the time it was an incredible cost in order to do that.
You know, I think,
compared to what other projects were.
Yeah.
And in other words, the cost of the house was quadrupled or something?
Oh, yeah.
Or at least, or maybe more.
It was, yeah.
Factor 5?
Yeah,
I forget what it was.
Yeah, I don't remember. It was like 120,000 or something like that.
And the house was 15,000 or something like that, yes.
Right. And we really considered buying it, but we didn't have any, there was no legal way for us to buy that house and to tear it down and get rid of it. Then,
so thank God you got John Vilforth involved.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I don't know what we would have done. Had the health department, the Secretary of Health issue an order telling him to get out of the house like we did with the radon issue. I mean, basically, we were really trying to find, we were contacting organizations that might contribute money to it. I mean, we just didn't know how else to do it. We were worried about the people. I mean, we could have told them to leave the house and then they would have had absolutely nothing and would have gone on welfare, and they were pretty close to it at the time anyway. So anyway, we got it cleaned up to a
reasonable
level
at the
quote
time.
unquote. I said it wasn't reasonable. It was still too high. We had placed long-term monitors in the house, and the levels were going to be higher than the public was allowed. And I wrote a letter off to the Federal Bureau of Radiological Health saying I did not agree, and they wrote back and said, we don't care whether you agree or not. It's clean, period. It's clean enough. We're done. People can go back and live in it. And that was the end of that. I mean, until many years later when you got involved and you know, that was interesting. Many that later, I got a call from the EPA office in Philadelphia saying, "Are there any projects that might be worthwhile in radiation Superfund stuff?" And I said, "Yeah, why don't you go out and take a look at Lansdowne?" And I never realized that. You know, I said that really wasn't cleaned up to my satisfaction. Maybe you guys can use some Superfund money to clean it up.
And so the whole thing got done again.
Oh, again, and how much did it cost? Over $1 million the second time around.
Second time around. And then the interesting thing was that Kajabian, Dr. Kajabian, who was the physicist,
right,
whose house it was, he also had a part interest in the radium in U.S. radium, or, I don't know, excuse me, in the El Dorado mine.
Oh, okay.
And it wasn't very big. It was a small interest, but he was hired by them and what happened is this guy Hartman, the salesman, would take the broken needles that the El Dorado Mine Company had produced, and they would send them to Kajabian to be reconstituted.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And so I have pictures of Hartman and Kajabian talking. In other words, they were business partners, as it turns out.
Huh. Well, the other interesting fact is that his son was a radiologist in Lancaster. The Kabajian son was a prominent radiologist in Lancaster. I mean, it's a small world. And we are regulating his activities as a radiologist completely separate from what his father had done.
Now, I'd like to show a picture of Tom as a young man. How old were you here, Tom?
I don't know.
Okay.
30, I don't know, about 30 probably.
Maybe 30. Here's a picture of Tom, and it just simply says that he's been the director of the Radiological Health Program for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania since 1961. And I believe that this is a 1969 document.
Right.
And so Tom had been director for about 8 years when this picture, can you get that? When this picture was taken. And one of Tom's professors, a very famous health physicist, and to me, my most famous gadfly of all health physicists was G. Hoyt Whipple. And here's a picture of Hoyt Whipple, who was one of Tom's professors at Rochester, which, by the way, had one of the great health physics programs in this country, in my opinion. It was one of the most diversified, also one of the ones that I think taught a huge amount of radiobiology.
Oh, yeah.
Probably the major radiobiology teacher. A teaching program at the time would be my guess.
Right.
Tom, you agree with
yes,
that?
oh, yeah. That's all they did was radiobiology.
But the thing is, to have the radiobiology background, to have the background from Brookhaven, and then to have the incredible experience, because that's what it really was, this incredible experience of the Lansdowne project. I mean, that's where you really learned, right? The nuts and bolts of health physics.
Well, we had,
when you're doing it.
Yeah, when you're doing it. Brookhaven, I can remember the first time I was on at Brookhaven as maybe my first month on the job at the reactor, and they would change fuel. They'd shut down on a weekend, and this was the old graphite reactor, and they'd change fuel, and they had a lot of experiments that they shot into the core through pneumatic tubes and irradiated, and we had to be there to make sure that when they took these out that they were safe to handle. And one of my first nights there, they were pulling some irradiated material out of the reactor, and they're pulling on this long rod, and I had a survey meter, a cutie pie survey meter that had a maximum of 20 R per hour dose rate meter,
Ion chamber,
and they're pulling this thing out, and I had it on the low scale and flipping scales, and I flipped it all the way to the 20 R scale, and very big meter. All at once they pulled this thing out, and the meter went wham, way past 20, and my hair stood up straight. I couldn't believe that I was in this, and it was gone before. I mean, those technicians were so good. The reactor operators were so good. They got that stuff out into a lead pig and off to the waste disposal facility before I could catch my breath. I mean, I won't repeat what I said when that meter, but I was, everybody roared after I mean, that's the way to learn health physics. I mean, and to learn how to do it right, because those guys really were, speed, the time of exposure, they got nothing. I mean, I think I got a half a millirem exposure on that, or one. I mean, everything was done so quickly, but boy, that meter pegged. And I'll never forget that. But anyway, getting back to, that's the practical health physics. stuff. That was an interesting symposium.
Yeah, here's the symposium, Peaceful Uses of Atomic Energy or Nuclear Explosives. Oh, this one,
Yeah.
was Plowshare?
Yeah, we were sitting in our office one day and we got a telephone call from Columbia Gas. And Columbia Gas, this was in the early 60s again. Columbia Gas suggested that they might want to use a nuclear device to create a gas storage cavity up by State College with nuclear explosives. And that it was being done in other places, and it was part of the Plowshare program, and it was called Project Catch, if I remember, and they were convinced that the state would go along with this and allow them to explode a nuclear device in the middle of Pennsylvania. I couldn't believe that they were proposing this, but you know, the proponents of nuclear energy or atomic energy at the time were really pushing. I mean, and the AEC was at that time more in the promotion field than they were in the regulatory field, unfortunately. And so we had to listen and watch and meet and discuss, and Columbia Gas chartered a plane and flew us out to Las Vegas to the test site to show us, to wine and dine us in Las Vegas, to show us what that was. This is what the.
Did you see the buggy?
The gas buggy?
The gas buggy detonation?
Yeah, I was at the gas buggy detonation.
Wow.
Yeah, but that was the one in New Mexico. The buggy was the one on the test site, I think. But anyway, gas buggy was in New Mexico, and I was there at the time. That was interesting. And with the approval of the governor's office, by the way, we made sure we got approval of the governor's office before we'd let them take us out there and wine and dine us, because they spent a lot of money, and we wanted to make sure we didn't have any problems later. We got back and then I went out to gas buggy separately to see an actual underground nuclear explosive occur, and we got back here and we said to them, basically, we really were not interested in having it done in Pennsylvania. And so they packed up and went home. And that symposium was after that decision. And the speech was, I guess, the role of the state health department in underground nuclear explosives or something like that. But it's interesting. Plowshare will haunt me again much later in my career, and we'll get to that later.
Okay, so let's move on.
Oh, by the way,
yes.
that also was the beginning of one of Pennsylvania's most interesting anti-nuclear people. That was the beginning of her career in the business of being anti-nuclear. Her name was Dr. Judith Johnsrud. She lived at State College, and this proposal was the thing that got her all upset about the whole nuclear business. And I wish they had stayed away. I wish they had never proposed it, because she gave us headaches. And I mean, she is a really sharp lady, and caused us all kinds of difficulties in trying to get other things done over the years, including low-level waste disposal. But that was an interesting time too. And that's also interesting that later we had a proposal for a uranium mining operation in Pennsylvania that came through the Pennsylvania Game Commission owned property, and there were, as you know, some uranium deposits in Pennsylvania that are apparently worth mining, and they were proposing, this was in the 80s, I guess.
I didn't realize that, because Jim Thorpe had been mining
Yeah.
10s and 20s.
Yeah.
And
Anyway, there was a proposal on the table.
because I know there was pitch blende on the surface. back
And
then.
we got to go out to New Mexico and Colorado and look at the mines and mills out there, and came back and said, no way are we going to allow that in Pennsylvania. So that was another area that we asked them not to do their thing with in the atomic energy field.
Now, in the 60s, weren't you simultaneously having problems with these experimental X-ray fluorescent machines, as I remember? Wasn't that late 60s when you had the burns on the fingers?
Oh, the X-ray diffraction.
Yeah, the X-ray diffraction machine.
Yeah, and but there were a lot of them, and that was one of the things. At the same time, we were still in the Department of Health, still in the Division of Occupational Health, and my doctor boss, supervisor, was interested in the burns and the effects, and so we looked at the issues and found that you want to.
Did you turn that off?
Wrong number. And found that either they weren't equipped with.
Wait, is this still on?
This time into the dean's office. Hopefully we can shut that down.
You pull the plug out in the back. Well, that won't. Well, okay.
That beep.
But the thing is, if the dean needs it, why don't you just simply pull the...
Well, but he's got lots of lines and none of them are open.
Yeah, let me just put it back on. I think we did okay. Pulling the plug, sometimes the phone people have to come over and re-regulate the phone.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are we on yet?
Yeah, the X-ray diffraction units around the state, we're getting lots of burns, and I think there's a paper that you have there that I sent to you.
Yes.
They're related to X-ray diffraction units. We came up with a proposed regulation requiring fail-safe kind of devices.
I think it was the
on
first state
lights.
in
Yeah.
the nation to do that, as I remember.
Right, right. At about the same time, we got our first law approved. And remember, our regulations were under the general health legislation of the Commonwealth, and I was concerned that they really weren't strong enough to provide us with the kinds of power that we may need at times to do the things that we were planning on doing. And so we proposed a specific law dealing just with radiation protection, and found out we couldn't get it passed if it dealt only with radiation protection. It also had to do with atomic energy development. And so we had a consortium of the developers of atomic energy and the regulator and the people who are using radiation sources in the state that were concerned that there was a need for legislation, working together to come up with some legislation. It's called the Atomic Energy Development and Radiation Control Act. And so it was a combination of the industry, all the people who are interested in the uses of atomic energy and/or radiation and radiation protection were incorporated.
When was that committee established?
It was the act was around 1965. The act was passed, and then the committee, the Atomic Energy Development Radiation Control Committee, was established, and they had the authority to review all of our regulations and stuff.
Well, only Peach Bottom 1 was before 65.
Yeah. Well,
And
Peach
so-
Bottom 1, yeah. It still didn't give us authority to really regulate.
Yeah, no, did you all have anything to do with Peach Bottom 1 per se?
We didn't.
It was certainly an AEC.
Yeah, oh yeah. I mean, you have to remember, the state did not have authority to regulate Atomic Energy Commission regulated materials or reactors. However,
Still doesn't.
right. However, the issue of states, when I first joined the state, the issue of states' rights in the atomic energy field was really important, and especially as it related to discharges into the rivers. And they had worked out a deal with Admiral Rickover around Shippingport for a discharge permit with limits on radioactive material. And we were part of the Bureau of Environmental Health, the Division of Occupational Health, the Radiological Health Section, and the Bureau of Environmental Health was really big on states' rights and especially related to water issues. And so they went forward and issued sanitary water board permits to companies that released radioactive material to the rivers. And so the shipping port facility, which was, that was the one that had the first permit. So Peach Bottom and the rest of them that came along later all had to have permits.
Oh, but did the old ARCO facility have a permit when it first started out?
No.
Remember Roger Caldwell's thing?
No. Oh, which one? No, the one in, NUMEC.
Yeah.
Nuclear Materials and Equipment
Yeah.
Corporation. No.
The old NUMEC one.
No, they didn't have, they weren't really, well, maybe they did.
I was trying to remember whether
They
they
had
did.
released to the river directly? Yeah, they did.
Oh, they did release to the river. The
They
question
must
is,
have.
and
There was
they
never a
had
challenge.
an AEC permit. The question is, did they also have a
Yeah.
state permit?
Yes. Yeah, anybody who was releasing directly into the rivers had to have a permit. And although AEC, always suggested that we didn't have authority, they never challenged. Nobody ever challenged it. And I mean, I didn't think it meant very much because the regulations, the AEC regulations were pretty solid anyway, and they just duplicated. But I mean, that was an issue that it went away slowly over.
Because I remember Roger Caldwell went upstream of the old NUMEC facility,
Yeah,
and was able to measure uranium levels that were higher than downstream.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And so that he felt he was doing a reasonable job as far as liquid discharges were concerned. Of course, the court didn't agree with that. But
one of my first trips after I joined Pennsylvania was around the Commonwealth with my boss, and the first site we visited was the facility that you had been talking about.
the Apollo, Pennsylvania facility?
No, the one in
Park?
Clearfield County.
Oh, the Clearfield County one. Oh, the Queehana.
The Queehana facility. Before Penn State had an interest in it. It was, I don't think, you did Penn State, I don't know if Penn State owned it then or not.
I thought Penn State owned it after, who was the first people that had it?
The first was Curtis
Yeah,
Wright.
Curtis. Yeah, you all didn't deal with Curtis, didn't you deal with Martin?
Curtis Wright turned it over to the state, and Martin Marietta occupied that one facility. Then that facility was turned over to Penn State, and then Penn State, for $1, turned it back to us. We didn't want it, but we had no choice. We thought Penn State, since they took everything out of the facility that they could get and use, that they ought to have responsibility for what was left. But Roger Gralin and I decided that it was clean enough for them to leave it, and that we'd take the responsibility. It wasn't, but I didn't know that at the time, and neither did Roger.
Right, and no one knew. I think
Right.
what we've discovered since then, that what Bill Kirk talked about in his tape was that's all new knowledge.
The first time they were actually making strontium titanate pellets when I first went in there. And I looked at that facility and I said, it was mega curie quantities of strontium. And I said, this place will never get cleaned up. That was the first word I had. And luckily, but it was Atomic Energy Commission licensed, and we said, hey, it's all yours, guys. Make sure it's cleaned up before they leave. That's all. We had a lot of other problems to worry about. They had 500 or 600 licensees in Pennsylvania. We had 10,000 other users of radiation sources. We're going to concentrate on the other 10,000. You concentrate on your 600 or 700. And that was a mistake. We should have looked over their shoulders a lot harder. But you just can't do everything.
But you were still pioneering so many things.
Yeah, and then this law was really neat because the new law, the Atomic Energy Development Radiation Control Act, because it did allow for takeover from the federal government. And that was the era of the first states, Kentucky and New York, and the rest of the states were all becoming agreement states, and I really thought that it would be good for Pennsylvania to become an agreement state. I didn't have an argument, unfortunately, that was strong enough. The people who said no said the AEC or the NRC later is doing it fine. Why should we foot the bill if they're doing a good job? And if you tell me they're not doing a good job, then you can take over. I couldn't tell them they weren't doing a good job. They were doing a good job. So, but I thought for survival of the Bureau in the future, that it was necessary to have that kind of authority. I mean, who knew? Actually, in 1979, well, the department was split off, or the Bureau, the radiation protection program was part of a new organization which was created in the early 70s because of the EPA creation of splitting them away from the environmental stuff, away from the health, the Department of Health and Human Services, Department of Health, Education and Welfare, creating the Department of Health and Human Services and EPA. The same thing was happening in Pennsylvania. The problem was we were in the health department, and an awful lot of the issues that we were working on were health related. They were, I mean, medical X-ray, I mean, come on, it's medical. I mean, it's health related. And the only thing that they wanted to move to the new Department of Environmental Resources was our environmental program. Everything else was going to stay with the health department. And I had a real problem with that because I thought our staff needed to be together. That you could not, I saw what New York State had.
And your lab is your right arm.
And yeah, the whole, if our health physicists were generalists. They could handle X-ray equipment, they could handle radioactive materials, they could handle environmental stuff. They had a lot of training in a lot of areas. And to split them and to just put them in little niches, little compartments, compartmentalize them into experts in X-rays versus X-rays and experts in environmental stuff, well, I thought was wrong, because at some point I thought we're going to need everybody to be together. And I fought and won. When the health department moved, the whole bureau, it wasn't a bureau then, the whole program moved. And so when we switched from the health department to the environmental department, it was one of the bright lights of my.
And roughly what year was that?
1971, about 72, early 70s, same time EPA was being split up. The same thing happened, it was very interesting, in 1979. The new administration came in. My boss called me in and said that we're looking at what we can transfer to other programs. We're going to try to make this strictly environmental, and all of your X-ray programs are going to be transferred to the Department of Health. And I said, what? And he said, yes, no question, it's going to be done. The funny part about that was, this Secretary of Environmental Protection, his name was Cliff Jones, was also a member of our advisory committee on atomic energy development and radiation control when it first started as a Deputy Secretary of Commerce. He became Secretary of Commerce later. He had a lot of political jobs. And I met him on the street after the Thornburg, in 1970, when the Thornburg administration was elected. And I asked him if he was coming back as a cabinet officer, and he said, he was thinking about it, but he wasn't sure where he wanted to go. And I said, why don't you try DER, our department? I said, you'd be really good there. And he said, oh, that's interesting. I think I might talk to him about it. He never said another word about it at all, and he was the guy who was going to split me up. I was really upset that he wanted to split up the bureau after I suggested that he come and head up the department. Anyway, that was about a week before TMI, and there's never been a word since about splitting up the bureau, because I mean, it was proven there was a need for everybody to be together and to work together. You couldn't have people from other departments. It worked.
Right. Well, let's talk about TMI because we're
They're
getting late
along,
here.
yeah.
And so TMI was one of the major learning, steep learning curves that everyone had that was involved with it. Why don't you tell us about your learning curve with TMI? Because there were so many problems. There were nothing but problems and not enough time or resources to solve them all.
That's for sure. I mean, it's hard to put it really into perspective. It was, I think I said someplace in a speech, it was a time I'd never want to go through it again, but I wouldn't have missed it for the world. It was exciting. I mean, I got about, if I got any sleep at night, it was 1 or 2 hours. Everybody was, the whole bureau pulled together. They all took a responsibility that they thought they could handle, and they went out and did it, and they did it well. That was the one thing about the whole, and I wanted to say, that one of the proudest things in my life, I look back on my role in Pennsylvania, was that the quality of the staff of the Bureau of Radiation Protection now, that they were really top level people, and I was really never more proud of them than I was.
They did amazing well under fire, personally.
Yeah, it was really great, and then we had people from other programs that came in and assisted in keeping when we were on a 24-hour detail for the first 30 days. I don't know. I still haven't really been able to pick out one thing that stands out in my mind. I just am thankful that we had the kind of information and the kind of relationship with the staff, with the health physics staff of the utility, and then their consultants, and with the NRC, that we were able to honestly talk about what was happening. I mean, we couldn't necessarily relate that to the public every time because we weren't sure, and we didn't want to scare the hell out of everybody, but until we were sure. And that was one of our, I mean, you can't speculate. You can, you can give warnings and warnings and warnings, and after a while, when the real thing is going to occur, nobody will pay any attention to you. So you've got to be careful when you tell the public that there's a need to be concerned and to do something. And but the relationships that we had set up with the governor, I mean, I'd spent a third of my time in the governor's office now, and a tenth of my time in the governor's office, or working with his staff on what was going to happen next in the first few days. And then with our staff being able to get enough information and data so that we were until Black Friday, until Friday, and the NRC chairman got involved, we thought we were pretty sure of what was going on and knew what was happening. And until the issue of the bubble and the inside the reactor vessel and the potential for an explosion were explained that Friday evening by Harold Denton to the governor and the rest of us, we think we had things under control. Then all hell broke loose. I mean, it was not a happy time. Let's put it like that. I mean,
it had to be incredibly difficult.
It was extremely difficult.
And I was very impressed with working with Maggie Riley. As you know, I was feeding her release data from the plant every 4 hours.
Right. Yeah.
And that went like clockwork.
Right.
Absolutely like clockwork. So that I really felt that the utility was giving you the best information they possibly could on the releases, which is what my job was.
There was no problem at all getting information from the technical people to react, especially the health physics people and you and your people. The biggest problem was the PR people
it was a disaster
for the utility.
Term for
it was, and also there was a real, I think, significant problem with the quality of the NRC staff that came up first from the regional office, and bought into what they were being told at the utility, that everything was under control, and it really wasn't. And
I think they had HPs and not reactor operators. They didn't have enough reactor
that's right.
people.
They didn't have people who understood how the reactor worked, and we did, which was rather interesting. We had Bill Dornsive, who had worked on that plant and had crawled through every pipe of that plant before.
But you also had access to DeBeal.
Yeah. Oh no, we
Now,
had.
Dick DeBeal knew a lot of reactor operations.
Right.
I don't know if he had a license like I did, but the point is he was close to being licensed.
Right.
And he really understood what was going
until
on.
NRC got its headquarters people up there on Friday and Saturday and could evaluate what, from the information they had, what was happening inside the plant. It was, from Friday to Saturday, was really hectic. And then the argument ensuing between the NRC staff people about whether or not there could be an explosion, whether hydrogen was being formed or not. And luckily we had...
It took people the longest time to understand that that was an anoxic environment.
Yeah, I know.
And there was
a mistake.
There was no explosion problem.
I don't know who, I don't remember who it was. One of the utility manufacturers, Westinghouse or GE, I can't remember, came up with the problem that there was.
It was anoxic. But the point is the utility knew. In other words, some of the operators understood that that was an anoxic
And nobody said it.
But the thing is, it never got out. In other words, I was too busy, I was just generating what's being released. It's not up to me to say that that's an anoxic environment. I mean, a contractor doesn't do that. But I knew it because I was looking at they have real-time oxygen gauges there. And the real-time oxygen gauge showed that there's no oxygen. It's an anoxic environment. And I kept thinking, I wonder why this isn't being explained. But the thing is, again, I'm working on 3 or 4 hours sleep a night, and I can't be messing with that. But the thing is that the operators understood that, but for some reason that information never got out in a timely manner, and it had to cause an incredible amount of heartache.
Well, one of the things, it did, but one of the things we learned by putting Bill Dornsive down there on Friday as our eyes and ears on the site.
It took him a while to come to the 7 o'clock Saturday meeting. He should have been coming all along.
Yeah, but
he didn't start the first couple of days, and he should have.
Right,
because it's easy to say that after
he was in our office. He was in our office the first couple of days. He didn't go down there until Friday. But he got. I mean, he was a nuclear engineer, understood the design of the reactor, understood the reactor physics, and started talking to the senior NRC staff down there and realized that, hey, there isn't a problem. He relayed that information back to the governor every day before his call from NRC and to me, and so that we didn't think there was a problem, but there was always that, one chance of, I don't know what, that he was wrong and that they were wrong, and we were really uptight for a long, long time as to whether or not that bubble could explode, and if it did explode, what are the consequences? And we had asked Lawrence Livermore Lab for a calculation of what somebody had asked them, I didn't, had asked a calculation of what the consequences would be, the radiation environment would be if there was a major release. And when I got a printout, I can still remember this brown piece of fax machine, the old fax machine.
Thermal paper.
Thermal, yeah, and with the isodose lines drawn on it. And I mean, it was, I wish I'd kept it in my desk. I don't know what happened to it. I wanted to keep it. I've made copies of it, but I don't know where it is. But these were devastating numbers. I mean, they would indicate there were going to be some deaths in the vicinity within miles of the plant if people hadn't been evacuated, if people weren't evacuated. So we were...
If all that material had been delivered out of the containment then.
Yeah. Well, we had asked them based upon their best knowledge of what could be released, what the offsite consequences would be based upon weather conditions. And they gave us what I didn't know how good their source term was, but it didn't make any difference. We had a piece of paper that showed...
The factor 10 didn't make any difference, really.
Not really. No, not for evacuation purposes. But, I mean, I walked over to our Pennsylvania Emergency Management Agency office like Saturday or Sunday or one of those weekend days, and they handed me this thing, and said, we're planning on moving state government to Carlisle, and your office will be so-and-so, and we're planning evacuation of the area, and you know, they had all these big maps and arrows and everything else drawn on them, and I said, oh my God. And so I said, well, let me know when I'm leaving, and I went back to work, because there was nothing I could do except to have a knot in my stomach grow tighter.
Now, did you all understand how low the pressure was in containment versus ambient pressure? I've never known whether or not, you know, there's a HISE gauge that's 1.5 feet in diameter that there was a TV monitor on. And we could see in the control room, we could see that HISE gauge. And it wasn't until about 5 weeks after the accident that we had our first really low pressure day. And that was the only day that we sweated for releases.
Right.
Because it could have gone, but the thing is, those chillers worked like 180% better than design, or 80% better than designed. And the fact that those chillers worked saved the day. And I didn't understand whether that was understood outside or not. But the thing is, I would walk, every time I would walk by the big board, I'd look at that TV monitor, and the HISE gauge was way negative. And as long as containment was negative versus outside pressure, there's not going to be a problem, because there's no driving force.
Right.
So there's no way to get anything out of there. And it was only like 4 weeks later that they had that really low pressure, and we sweated for about 3 hours as the low pressure system went by, because it was super low pressure. And we were scared to death that it was going to turn positive. But the filters probably would have held. But the point is, up until then, there was no, you didn't have the driving force. And without the driving force, it's almost immaterial what the source term is. And I don't know whether this ever got out. You know, I keep looking back on these early terrible days, thinking about that.
I can't recall.
Okay, well,
I mean, I know that the first morning of the accident, with the dome monitor reading what it did, the plans were, if there was overpressure, there was going to be a leak, a design pressure, design basis leak, and the wind was blowing in the right direction, and we were ready to, matter of fact, we had informed the state police when they had to evacuate the people across the river, because
the wind was blowing in that direction.
Wind was blowing in that direction. If the containment wasn't holding, there was no question there was going to be a lot of stuff over there.
And Paul, we had no idea that dome monitor could be so easily contaminated.
Was it? I didn't.
The design of the dome monitor sucked, and we didn't know it.
Well, it was high. It
Idea.
didn't make any difference.
Oh yeah, it was high, and
you monitor quick.
The PAL had been exceeded, and that's all there was to it.
Yeah.
And so you had a perfect right to be very nervous about it.
And so, you know, you guys flew over, the helicopter over, took some samples, we analyzed them and said, cancel the evacuation.
Thank God. You know, the control room called me in a panic, and thank God I was there to get the call and to say, I know those SAM2s react to noble gases, and I'll bet we have a lot of noble gases in those things. And I'm just so glad I was there for the call, because otherwise the control room was going to call for evacuation, which would have, can you imagine how that would have panicked things?
Well, yeah.
And they were this close. And
the control room was going to.
Yes.
Well, I don't know, maybe it was a good idea to evacuate.
I had talked to those guys then, and I
just
said,
because of the
and
problems
I said,
that
don't
occurred
do it
later.
on that. I said that from what the release monitors tell me, there's nothing but noble gases going out, and I don't believe this. We have to get it counted, and you know, our counting lab is in a background of 200 MR per hour.
Yeah.
So the counting lab on site was useless, and so thank God. I guess I got a hold of Maggie, I forget who I got a hold of, and you all counted that sample and adjudicated the fact that there was no iodine.
Right.
But those were a tense couple of hours.
Oh, I know.
We were this close to evacuating, or calling for evacuation.
We tried to, I mean, there was a weird time. We tried to stop the train from going by, the train tracks run right by TMI, and right early on in the accident, we said,
they go through the exclusionary.
Yeah,
too.
let's shut down the train. You don't shut down trains. We wanted to shut down Route 4 for the 441?
Yeah, 441.
That goes right to the reactor. State police said no. Why? It's the only way in and out for all these people. you've got to keep it open. We said, but there are stuff being released from that plant. They said, sorry, the governor's the one that's going to have to tell us to do that. You can't tell us to shut it down, to close it down. So, but all these are plans, of what we want to do is we were afraid that the highway would get backed up with people, that people would start leaving, and if you close it, let them go the other way, and we'd have access to the facility. No, they wouldn't do that. They were ready, or people was ready to evacuate people over on the West Shore early in the morning.
Do you know what those railroad people did? I don't know if you ever knew this. The first night of the accident, they had like a 100-car freight train. They stopped it right across the main gate at 1 in the morning, and they wouldn't move it.
Why?
I don't know. We couldn't get it moved. It just sat there, and it was blocking people coming in and out. The people at Bettis had just flown down. We needed them to evaluate what the hell was going on, right? Who's more important than the people that designed the plant, right?
Yeah.
So we need them in there. We can't get them in. We finally get them in, and then it turns out they sent us people that weren't respirator trained. And they're going into an area that's more than 5,000 times MPC iodine. And they've never had a respirator on, they're not respirator trained. So I get a hold of Jim Brennan at 2 in the morning, bring him up. The train's still there. You know how big Jim Brennan was, he weighed 300 pounds. So they're on pushing Jim Brennan over the couples of the railroad train, trying to get him in there to check these guys out so we can get something done. It was ludicrous. The train thing never worked. It never worked. Anyway, let's keep going. It's kind of funny though.
Yeah, there were a lot of funny incidents. I mean, I can remember sitting in the governor's office, I think it was Saturday night or Sunday, and they were talking about who was going to portray the governor and his staff in the movie version of the accident. They had just seen, as a matter of fact, yeah, oh yeah, and they thought Robert Redford was perfect for the governor. And I just told the governor that a couple of years ago. He laughed, Governor Thornburg, but he said, yeah, he thought that would be perfect. I don't want to tell you who they suggested for me.
Well, the thing is that I don't think that any of us have ever been so stressed as in those times.
Oh, it was something.
There's a picture of Tom here.
No,
which,
not that one.
This one. This one, okay. Picture of Tom here. I guess still during the first year of the accident?
Oh yeah, it was right after. We were having public meetings, and I was so tired. I think that was the Krypton issue, the releases of the...
Which is a year after the accident,
yeah.
Roughly.
Yeah. Or, I don't know. I mean,
It was the first day of the release.
It was not during.
It was June 27th, 1980 was the first day
yeah,
of the
but
release.
you had to get
Krypton
the people.
release.
You had to get the people to accept it prior to it being released, and that was the public. That was
huge
these
amount of work
public meetings were, and that was hairy. Then we had the meetings about the water releases.
Oh, all those meetings with water companies.
And it was
those.
It was the stuff coming out of Peach Bottom was higher than they'd be releasing at TMI, but
The stuff coming out of Hershey Medical Center was killing us for a while.
yeah, right.
That really hurt.
Before we finish, there was one other thing I wanted to talk about. That was the creation of the Conference of Radiation Control Program Directors.
Oh yeah, when did that happen, Tom?
And that happened in the middle '60s. What we found was in the Northeast, we were talking a little bit among the states, New York and New Jersey and then New England, and finding out that we were all reinventing the wheel. We really...
all the different states.
Yeah, all the states were trying to do the same thing, and we were all doing it slightly different. And somebody had already done that and tried it and decided it didn't work. And there was a need for people to get together every once in a while to talk about what they were doing. Also, we found that as individual states, our relationship with the federal government wasn't very good. With the NRC and with the health and education and welfare was pretty good, but with the AEC at the time, it really wasn't very good. They wanted to tell us what to do, and we weren't too happy about having that done. So, well, a little bit of, I went down to talk to Jim Terrell, who was then he just became director of the Federal Bureau of Radiological Health. The states never had funding to get people to a meeting. I mean, they couldn't go to Health Physics Society meeting, for example. None of, 3/4 of the states had limits on out-of-state travel, and they couldn't get out of their state, well, except at their own expense, to go to meetings. And the only way we figured that it could work was to have the federal government underwrite the meeting. So the first time around, we had a meeting in Montgomery, Alabama, where all the states got together for a couple of days, and we all talked about our programs and stuff. Yeah.
Remember him?
I don't think he wasn't in charge of the Alabama program then. It was a little bit later. But Louisiana, New York, I mean, all the states got together. And we elected, and I was the first chairman of the conference for 2 years.
Well, it was one of your,
Hanson
it was
Blatt.
your idea, wasn't it?
Well, it was my idea with a couple of Hanson Blatts from New York, and Saul Harris was instrumental in doing it. And then the guys from Louisiana and Kentucky and California and Texas were all influential in supporting it. And so it started back then, and it has been just wonderful for the states to be able to get together. They're still supported by the federal government, and that still is the only way they can get to meetings. It is weird the way state budgets work, but many a time we'd get an order from the governor's office, no out-of-state travel, period. And you do your work in state, you don't travel out of state unless you use somebody else's money. And that's...
somebody else's money.
And we had to get somebody else's money. So now it's a viable organization. It's supported by all the federal radiation agencies, including FEMA. And I'm really proud of what it's become. So that's the two things I'm proud of. One is the quality of staff of the Bureau of Radiation Protection in Pennsylvania, and the other is the Conference Radiation Control Program Directors. I mean, I didn't have to do anything I mean, all I had to do is sit back and let the people do their thing in Pennsylvania.
Well, you personally did a huge amount during TMI.
Well, that was a year or two. I mean, 30 years I was there, and if you got the right people and they were motivated, I just didn't stand in their way. I'd go. Just come to me when you had problems, and I'll try to get you everything you need to do your job and do it well. And I don't know what the staff is, 60 or so now, compared to the 5 that we had, plus the lab, and the lab is not separate. That was one of our major losses, I think, losing direct control of the laboratory. But the quality of the staff, Pennsylvania was a leader in many areas because we had to be. I mean, we fell into things right on. God, I mean, I wish somebody else had found the radon problem. We didn't need it at the time, but it was there. We took care of it. We went forward.
You were the lead state on that.
And we had to be because we were there.
Absolutely.
So, you want to call it quits?
Well, the thing is that let's show a couple more pictures here.
I did retire from the state
in
1991. Went to work for the Department of Energy in their environmental restoration program, cleaning up the sites that got contaminated.
And you worked there for how long?
About 6 years, and then they had an early out program that I took advantage of, and a check for $25,000 to leave now, and I said I'll take it. But I had one very interesting experience up there, and that was cleaning up a site in Alaska that got contaminated as a result of the plowshare program, where they were going to create a harbor up in Alaska that would be useful for 2 months a year because the Bering Sea is frozen the rest of the time. And they had a big plan on using nuclear explosives to create this harbor. The U.S. Geologic Survey, they had set up a camp up there. We're doing all kinds of environmental stuff. Really important was you know, this was in 1963, I think it was, that they went up there and they did environmental studies that were beyond belief compared to they're what you do now, but they did it in 1963, and the U.S. Geological Survey went up and they brought a little bit of 10 millicuries of iodine 131, strontium 85, cesium 137, and some fission products from the Sedan crater in Nevada, where they made the big hole in the ground and blew all of the soil out of the ground. So there are a lot of fission products in that.
A lot of alphas of them.
Yeah, in the soil. And they brought that up there, and they did a weird experiment. They poured water in the ground and let it run down, and to determine...
They put cesium in it? I mean, the other stuff's all short half-life, but cesium.
Cesium and the fission products. There were some...
They have some long half-life fission?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, it was... They just grabbed 10 pounds of dirt and brought it up there and dumped it on the ground.
There's a certain amount of uranium and plutonium in it.
Yeah, yeah. And they wanted to see how the tundra reacted to contamination. Anyway, the project was canceled, thank goodness. And so they didn't have anything else to do, so they illegally decided that they did their experiment. They picked the stuff up with front end loaders or bulldozers, put it into a big pile, covered it up with 3 or 4 feet of tundra, and went home. And then, this is 1963, then a researcher at University of Alaska, a graduate student doing a paper, dug into the whole Project Chariot proposal and found that there was some radioactivity left. And the senator from Alaska was running for re-election. And he went up to the area, which was north of the Arctic Circle. It was about 25, well, the site was about 25 miles away from any populated area, and promised those people that he'd have the federal government clean it up. He got back, a call came from the Senate office building, Senator's office to Department of Energy, and unfortunately I was sitting there when the telephone rang. And so, and plus I had been responsible for some cleanups at the nuclear test site in Nevada, and that was a part of their project. So, I mean, they shuttled it down to me, shunted it down to me, and so I spent 1993 either on the telephone with Alaska or the senator's office or up in Alaska. I mean, I was up there when the temperature was 25 degrees below zero and the wind chill was 75 degrees below zero. You had to cover your face or leave it out for 10 minutes and you were frozen. I mean, it was horrible. And in the July of '93, we went up there and cleaned up that site, brought all that stuff back to Nevada and buried it. But we had to have public meetings with the Eskimos. We had to have Eskimos looking over our shoulder. They were sure that all their lung cancer problems were a result of the radioactivity that had been left there. Have to have public meetings where you would, and they didn't know anything about radiation, so we had to teach them about radiation. We would have a public meeting and I would give 2 or 3 sentences and then a translator translated into Inupiat so that the Eskimos would understand it. And if you ever want a problem speech, try off the top of your head. Not I mean, I had an outline, but you lose your chain of thought. You lose what you're going to say next when you hear this guy talking in a different language. It is really, they weren't simultaneous; they were afterwards. And the real thing that really got to me during those meetings was I would make a statement about something like the half-life of cesium-137 is 30 years, and therefore it will be gone in 300 years or something like that. And then he would translate it, and the audience would laugh. And I didn't understand. I mean, he was telling a joke when I was trying to be serious, and I didn't know what he was saying. It was really, it was an interesting time. It really was. So that's what I got this award for.
Okay, you want to show this one?
I also got a nice bonus after I got back, and we took 2 weeks off and went to Europe and really lived it up. But that was an interesting job. They have $6 billion in money to clean up the sites left by the weapons program stuff, and they aren't making much progress, and it's sad. That's a whole different story. I was just happy to get out of there. It was so frustrating not being able to get anything done. It was really.
Well, at least when you were in Pennsylvania, you got lots accomplished. You might have been frustrated from time to time, but you got lots. And also many publications that we haven't talked about. Here's this book, Radionuclides in the Food Chain, with editors of the great John Harley, who was one of the great radiochemists of our time, and Tom's article, The Action of 3 Mile Island, 1979, is a retrospective review of this accident and the many lessons learned, because we all had lessons learned, the state, the utilities, the NRC, and hopefully all of the emergency planning people too. There should have been many, many lessons learned there.
Well, you know, we did have an emergency plan before the accident.
Yes, and we
it was
practiced it,
fun,
too.
and we practiced it. It was funny. The lieutenant governor's office called us about a week or two after the accident and said, "Do we have an emergency plan?" We said, "Yeah, it's right on your desk." He said, "Oh."